Hello and welcome to Ask the Specialists on CMU Public Television. I'm Mike Horace, and tonight we're asking the home energy experts. Your questions next. Welcome again to Ask the Specialists on CMU Public Television. This program is driven entirely by your questions. So if you have a question about your home energy usage, please do give us a call now. The number 800-727-9268. You can also tweet your questions to us. That's at WCMU_AskThe. Or you can pose a question on Facebook, facebook.com/AskTheSpecialists. Our guests tonight are Joanne Chappell Tennyson of Howling Hammer Builders, Inc. She is also president of the Home Builders Association of Central Michigan. We're also joined by Matt Rosendahl of Great Lakes Home Performance, LLC. Thank you to both of you for joining us tonight. And before we get to some viewer questions, Joanne, can you tell us about your areas of expertise?
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm with Howling Hammer Builders. I'm a green builder remodeler. We do custom design work throughout basically the majority of Michigan. We do new build construction. We also do remodeling and energy retrofit. And I'm also currently involved with a program through Inspired Green out of the Grand Ledge area, working with DTE Energy in their energy efficiency assistance program for low-income families in the Detroit area.
And Matt, what about you? What do you specialize in?
Well, my company, Great Lakes Home Performance, we primarily do energy audits and Energy Star certification for new home construction. So we're involved both in existing homes and new home construction, working with homeowners and working with builders to plan and renovate homes to be a lot more energy efficient, safe, and comfortable.
A reminder, you can join us now, the number 800-727-9268, or ask a question on Twitter or Facebook. We got a couple questions before the show this evening. So Matt, I'd like to start with you.
Okay.
What is a home energy audit?
An energy audit is an assessment of the energy performance of a home. We can come into a home and based on the insulation and the air infiltration and some testing and things that we do, we can come up with a plan for what might be done to the house to make it more energy efficient and at the same time safer and more comfortable. So it's really a way to look at the house and come up with a plan that we can then hire a builder or a contractor to implement, or even some of the things are DIY stuff that the homeowners can do themselves to make the home more energy efficient. So really we just help guide people in the right direction.
And Joanne, that's where builders step in, isn't it?
Yes. Once an energy audit has been done on a home, and as Matt said, it kind of lays out a plan, or can lay out the plan on what the house actually needs. Sometimes people think there are certain things that their house needs when in fact that might not be the real issue, that might not be the true need. So once an audit is done on a house, that helps us identify what needs to be improved, where we can get the biggest bang for the buck.
All right, we have a question that just came in. What is a good way to insulate and seal walls, especially in a concrete basement? And they're looking at finishing their basement, I believe.
Well, if they're finishing the basement, the primary concern with anything you're going to be doing in the basement is managing moisture. And it's important to remember that basements, the moisture is going to go actually in both directions, kind of in and out. Energy Star actually has a recommendation that there should be no vapor barriers in the insulation in the basement. So if you're going to use fiberglass insulation, make sure that it doesn't have a craft paper backing on it. Make sure that you don't put any visqueen up on it. The old way of doing that was to insulate it and then put plastic up because you wanted to stop the vapor from getting into the wall. But that's a bad idea because then you're trapping moisture in the wall. There are some really good foam products out there that can go right attached to the wall, or I really like spray foam insulation on a foundation wall. If you use a good closed cell foam insulation, maybe frame out the wall with some 2x4s, spray it full of foam insulation, and then drywall over the top of that. That gets you enough of a vapor barrier that's on both sides that you're really not going to have any moisture issue.
And Matt brings up a really good point. One of the biggest problems that we have as remodelers when we're dealing with basements that maybe had already been remodeled is opening up those walls and seeing how much mold had formed because it hadn't been dealt with effectively. Before you do anything in a basement, you really need to make sure that you've taken care of any moisture infiltration issue.
And that same caller from Tustin was asking about their basement floors as well. What should be done to finish those?
Basement floors are a challenge, and that's why with new construction, I really try to encourage people to put insulation under the slab floor because it's one of the few things that you can't do later. But there are some products out there. One of them called InsoFast is a floating floor system that gives you an effective R value of R3. It's a wooden 2x2 plates that have a plastic cleat on the bottom of them, so it gets you a little dead air space underneath there, and if you have any moisture intrusion or anything, there's no problem. So it's really a way that you can put in a floating subfloor on the basement floor that gets you some R value that keeps you up off of the cement. Definitely don't just put carpet and padding right down on the concrete floor. That's kind of a no-no. You'll want to at least frame up something.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question coming from Everett, and they're asking, can we use solar panels on our roofs this far north?
It's funny. We were just talking about that. Solar panels right now have actually reached a point of being cost effective in Michigan. A lot of it is because of the low price of solar panels. Solar panels right now, you can buy the panels themselves for about $1 a watt. Installed price for solar is between $3.50 and $4 per watt. So a system big enough to power your entire house and offset your electric bills might be $15,000 to $20,000, but it is finally cost effective, especially if there are programs that you can get into with a utility company where it's net metered, so your meter spins backwards when you're producing power, but also some of the utility companies, especially Consumers Energy, are buying that power that you produce back at a higher rate than what you're buying power to use. So that little multiplier makes it really cost effective.
And when you're looking at these solar panels, who can you talk to about maybe getting them installed? Where do you turn for help?
It is hard right now to find a good solar panel installer. I know a few installers. Every market has a few installers. You want to look for somebody who is what they call NABCEP certified. There are some certifying organizations out there that make sure that people are installing the right equipment and things that are going to last. I would say get a hold of an energy expert in your area. Myself, I have some resources on my website. Even a lot of the builders have contacts within the industry for people who are out there doing the stuff.
We have a question for Heartland this evening. The caller says they have no insulation in their exterior walls, but they have 3 layers of plywood sheeting. Is this a sufficient R value?
No, no. The sheathing is negligible at best with regards to insulation value. If there's any way that they can access a wall cavity, they really need there are injection foams that can be utilized that have not quite as invasive. There are methods to blow cellulose into existing wall cavities, but no, the sheathing that's not doing anything for them.
Yeah.
Okay. A caller from Alpena asks, they have a well that produces water at 56 degrees, and they're wondering what kind of cost would be involved to change from carbon-based fuels to geothermal heat in their car or in their house.
Making the switch to geothermal is an expensive ordeal, but it can offer some huge savings, especially if they're out in propane country and the energy cost can be quite high. A geothermal system might cost $20,000 or more. I mean, it can be a really pricey system. There's still a 30% tax credit available for it, though, so 30% of that they can get back in the form of a tax credit. And open loop geothermal, which is I think what they were alluding to right there, is a decent system. They'll have to have somebody who really knows what they're doing come up there and do it, though.
The nice thing about geothermal, at least within the Michigan area, we now have a number of very reputable HVAC firms that are qualified to come out and give them some advice to install them. So I would recommend that. It certainly makes sense to go ahead and get some bids and have it looked at. It's a wonderful source of heat. Feels good, it's comfortable in the house.
And get an energy audit at the same time. Get an energy audit done, because an energy audit might only cost a couple $100, and the improvements that they can make might be only a few $1,000s that will make that geothermal system perform a whole lot better.
We have a viewer in Ludington asking, do you have any reservations about using utility company smart metering programs?
No, I kind of like smart metering programs.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that people need to remember about smart metering is that the grid is dumb. The exact opposite of smart meters is what the grid is right now. The grid is dumb. So when the power goes out, when your power at your house goes out, the grid doesn't know that. And so if you've got a smart meter, that smart meter is going to communicate to the grid, or actually it'll stop communicating to the grid, and the grid knows that. So then they can reroute power, they can send crews, and they can actually diagnose the problems that might be wrong with a particular substation and send the right people with the right equipment and get power back on sooner. It's not a social control mechanism that a lot of people think it is. It really is important for the grid.
We have our first tweet of the evening coming in, and this one asking about both solar power and wind energy. We've touched on solar already, but they're wondering, how cost effective are these for a home environment?
Solar right now, I actually just calculated the payback period for putting solar panels on my house, which is a modest 1,680 square foot ranch house, and my panel system will pay for itself in 7.1 years, and I'm going to put it in the springtime. Wind power is a little bit different. You'd have to have an awfully big turbine in order to produce enough power to be worthwhile. And the problem with wind turbines is it's moving parts, not like solar. With a good solar panel system, the parts are warranted for a particular output for 20 to 25 years. And even after that, it's minor degradation. But with a wind turbine, you've got moving parts, you've got wind, you've got hail, you've got lightning strikes. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with that. It's really not as cost effective. I dare say it's not hardly worth doing.
When you look at the wind units that are designed for residential use, for single site use, they really are not producing enough energy to supplement what you. It might be nice if you just want to run your irrigation system off it. It might actually work, and there's one called the egg beater to save the world. Cute little sculptural looking piece, quite pricey and really no return here. If you look on the wind maps, Michigan is not a prime place for wind in the first place, unless you're talking about the big commercial units.
Yeah, or maybe for a specific use. If you have a pond and you want to put an aerator in the pond, for specific uses like that, you can do that, or a small water pumping station.
All right, from MESIC tonight, we have a viewer asking, what is the proper way to insulate a block crawl space? It has a dry sand floor in it.
Well, one of the things that has happened traditionally with crawl spaces is they wanted vented crawl spaces. And I don't know what the builder's perspective right now is on vented crawl spaces, but traditionally the thinking has been wrong. So first of all, besides that it's a sand floor and a block wall, there are probably vents in it. And one of the things that we want to do is to eliminate those vents. If you seal that floor, which means really seal it, use the proper material, not just a visqueen material laid down there, but actually seal it, tape the joints and everything, wrap it up the walls, and then insulate the walls maybe with rigid foam, just blue board foam, nailed in place so that it's all encapsulated, so you have no vents and the sealed floor and the walls insulated to R10, then that's an enclosed crawl space, almost a conditioned crawl space. That would be the ideal way to go.
That's the ideal. You really want to include that crawl space into the conditioned area of the home. And that does mean a full air seal as well as a rigid board on the sides,
right.
Not just fiberglass flopped there.
Right, don't use fiberglass insulation. And when we talk about the vents, the traditional thinking on crawl space ventilation was that you wanted to have vents to keep the crawl space dry. Well, that's not really the purpose of the crawl space vents. The purpose of those vents was to vent soil gases like radon and methane and things that come up out of the soil. Because if the thinking is to keep moisture out, in the summertime, you're actually letting moisture in because you've got high humidity and cold surfaces, and so you get condensation. So the thinking on crawl spaces really has been wrong for a long time, and builders and code officials know that now.
On the subject of crawl spaces, this viewer in Lewiston, they have an encapsulated crawl space. They have a vapor barrier and a floor with 2 inches of styrofoam on the wall, still getting high humidity in the 75 to 95% range and getting some mold developing. What advice would you have for them?
Find out where the moisture is coming from. The moisture is coming from somewhere. There's a leak somewhere. There's it could be a duct leak even if they have a humidifier running in the furnace system and they've got a supply leak, or if the air conditioning system is leaking air conditioning air down there, then they've got some extra cold down there that's causing some condensation. Maybe some leaks from the upstairs if there are air leaks around the registers and any penetrations in the subfloor. They could be getting a lot of that air in there. So the key thing is to find out where that moisture is coming from, because if it's an encapsulated system down there in the crawl space, then they're introducing moisture from somewhere, and they need to find out what that is.
Because if the encapsulation is truly in place, it's no longer a ground moisture issue. It's now got to be coming from the house itself. Somehow the house is introducing moisture.
And it may take somebody coming in and doing a blower door test or using thermal infrared to find that source.
What is a blower door test?
The blower door test, we'll put an artificial door in the front door with a big fan on it that depressurizes the house. And it exaggerates the air leakage that's in the house. So we can walk around and feel any of the air leaks that are coming around windows and doors and electrical outlets, so that we can quantify the amount of leakage that there is and also identify where it's coming from so that we can seal it with caulk or foam.
And one of the biggest misconceptions is people assume that insulation is the core way of keeping their home comfortable, when in fact air infiltration is the main culprit for making your house uncomfortable, particularly if you happen to have fiberglass in your walls. If air is moving in, it's just like the filter on your furnace. It's washing away all of the resistance, which is the R value in the insulation in the first place. So finding where your house is actually leaking air is as important or more important than the insulation value itself.
Exactly.
Okay. From Petoskey, a question asking about the flue in their chimney. Is there a proper way to seal it off?
They do make a product, what's that thing called? The chimney...
There's a chimney pillow.
Chimney pillow, chimney balloon, chimney pillow, yeah.
It's actually an inflatable device. It will close it off. The safety feature to it is if somebody actually by mistake starts a fire, it will, obviously the flame will cause it to
just melt.
It'll blow it up. But it is probably, rather than trying to permanently close off a flue, I think it's the best piece on the market.
Yeah.
A viewer from Tustin has a question about their hot water heater. Is it a good idea to add additional insulation or a blanket to your hot water heater?
I think so. Typically, the extra blanket, if it's an older water heater, might pay for itself in 5 or 6 years. But I would want to find out what kind of water heater it is. If it's a natural draft water heater, and it may be more cost effective to just get rid of the thing. Remember that water heaters only have about a 15-year lifespan, and that's if they're maintained properly. So if your water heater is over 15 years old, maybe you haven't been draining it and working the valves and everything like you should, you might want to think about a new water heater, because it'll die when you least expect it.
If it's in good shape and it's a little bit older unit, a water heater jacket is not a bad idea. But as Matt said, you have to be extremely careful about how you install it, particularly if it's a gas-fired unit. You want to make sure that you don't cover up any controls and that you don't have it anywhere near flame. So if you do install one, be really careful about how you do it.
A viewer in Shepherd is asking about wood-burning stoves, asking actually cherry pits versus pellets of corn. They heard that dried cherry pits provide more BTUs. What do you know about that?
I don't know. I would have to Google it. I would have to Google it.
I've actually read the same literature, and I think it had to do with the density of the cherry pit as opposed to, I would liken it probably to the difference between burning a soft kiln-dried wood that burns hot and fast as opposed to burning hardwood, which actually gives you a better heat. And yeah, I mean, that is one of those things you really need to talk to the guys that sell the stoves. They've got much better calculations on what kind of BTUs they're throwing out.
Yeah.
Okay, from Wynn, we have a viewer asking, what are the benefits of radiant floor heat, and is it cost effective?
Yes, and there are a few different types of radiant floor heat. Typically, we're dealing with like a boiler or water heater type situation where we have hydronic tubes in the floor that are going to radiate heat. It's a very efficient way to heat. It's very easily zoned. It heats you, not all the furniture and the space and everything. It's a very good system. It can be kind of expensive to install, especially in a retrofit situation. If it's a retrofit situation, sometimes people look at the electric resistance things that are in the floor, make sure that it's on a timer, not just on a switch that you can turn it on. I don't know, have you ever put it in?
Yeah, we've used them a lot. The disadvantage to if you're trying to do a whole house radiant system is obviously there's no ductwork, so now it doesn't avail itself for air conditioning. And in Michigan, we're in a climate where we're kind of a 50-50. So that creates some issues. I really like using it in spaces. It's wonderful in bathrooms, wonderful in kitchens, any place where you're going to have hard floor where people are going to be barefoot a lot. It's a tremendously comfortable sense of heat because a forced air will actually fluctuate several degrees as the system kicks on and kicks off. You don't have that differential with a radiant system. It stays a constant temperature all the time. But if you are using the electric resistance, be very careful about your controls. We've watched people forget about them, leave them on, and suddenly they've got a room that's 90 degrees in the house and not so comfortable and not so energy efficient. So you do have to be careful about your controls.
We've got a few more questions about basements that have come in. That seems to be a big issue tonight. This one from St. Clair Shores. The caller says their basement is always cold. They've had their rim joints done, but she's wondering how to get the basement warmer.
Well, you have to remember, in Michigan, when we get below frost level, we're a constant 54 degrees. So the basement is always speaking to that 54 degrees. Really comfortable in the summer, not so much in the winter. So while we went for a long time as builders believing that as long as we were below grade, there was no need to insulate, because we were buffered by that 50-some degrees, the logic escapes me on how we thought that was practical. So a basement will always be chilly until you get those walls insulated and you protect yourself from that 50-some degrees.
Yeah, and there are a lot of good systems out there for insulating the walls, and we talked about doing the floors, so there are a lot of different things out there, but yeah, insulating the walls to at least maybe R10 is really important to be able to keep that basement, like she said, in the conditioned space.
Okay. From Sheboygan, we have a question. They have a 2-story house with a full basement, and they're wondering, should they insulate between the basement and the first floor?
Typically, no, because the basement is conditioned space. The only time you would want to insulate that space between the basement and the first floor is if the basement is an unconditioned basement. A Michigan basement that you don't care if it ever freezes, maybe you have no plumbing, no plumbing. Nothing down there that if it freezes, it matters. But otherwise, if your furnace and your water heater and things are down there, and there's no way to keep air from moving between the two, no, you don't want to bother insulating that. Between that space, it's better to put that insulation on the walls to keep the cold out where the cold is originating.
Okay. From Cadillac, we have a viewer asking about the concept of no-crawl vents and wondering how long that has been in effect.
Well, we just talked about that a few minutes ago. I don't know when that really started, that we started getting away from those. I guess maybe it's been
a few years.
Yeah, it's been a few years. It's when we started really paying attention to the actual performance of the house and the energy performance. You know, and there are still areas where people believe that you've got to have a crawl space vent, and really they don't perform that well. If you really read the literature nationwide from building performance specialists, vented crawl spaces are antiquated. They're just not put in new houses. And there are houses being built right now that have crawl spaces, but they never vent the crawl space on the new construction house. And as much as possible, we retrofit it.
From Petoskey, we have a question about wind turbines, particularly a Honeywell 6500 wind turbine. It costs about $6,500, provides 15 watts at 30-mile-an-hour wind speed. And they're wondering, what would the payback period be on such a thing?
Long time, 300 years. I mean, it'd be a long time.
A long time. And if you're contemplating putting up any form of a wind turbine, I would suggest that you go on the internet and that you do some research with regards to the wind maps. They are available online, and it does really show very clearly across the state of Michigan where it might be feasible, unless you're right over on the lake on the very tip of the thumb. The wind maps just look really bad across Michigan.
Yeah, and find someone that has a wind turbine and stop and ask them. You know, there are a lot of people out there that if you're driving down the road and you see a wind turbine in somebody's yard, they're probably more than happy to talk about it, because people that are energy geeks really like to talk about that stuff. And if they stopped and talked to somebody and asked them how's the payback period and how's it performing and whatever, they would probably get a real dose of reality.
All right, time for one more question, and we'll try to keep this one under a minute if we can.
Okay.
But it's going to be one of the more simple questions. What are some simple ways to keep your energy costs down in your home?
Turn things off. One of the biggest issues that we have with contemporary society is the number of things we have that run in our house all the time. So at night, when you think you've got everything turned off, go around and see how many little blue lights are still on in your house.
Yeah, you know, a good example of that, and I'm not saying everybody should unplug their microwave, but in its lifetime, a microwave sitting on the kitchen counter will use more electricity to run the clock than it ever does in its lifetime cooking food. Because it's all of those little ghost loads that are sucking that electricity. And as far as heat goes, the same thing. Turning your thermostat back makes a huge difference. A lot of people are under the misconception that you know, if you just turn it back, then it just have to work harder to make up for it. No, turning your thermostat down does make sense. The one caveat with that is that, yeah, if it's an undersized furnace and you got a house that has problems in it, then that's another issue. But in most circumstances, turn the thermostat down, just use less, use CFL light bulbs. There's tons of information about it, and get an energy audit.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you so much to our guests, Joanne Chappell-Tennyson of Howling Hammer Builders and Matt Rosendahl of Great Lakes Home Performance. And thank you to our viewers as well for all of the great questions tonight. If you asked a question this evening and you didn't hear an answer on air, be sure to check our Facebook page tomorrow morning. We're going to be placing some of those answers up on that page, facebook.com/askthespecialists. Thanks to our phone operators, Josh Jerome, Amanda Harrison, and Matt Tennyson. And join us next week for Ask the Specialists. Next week, we are asking the doctors. I'm Mike Horace. Thanks for joining us, and have a good night.